Welcome back again. This is going live. My name is Dan Buzzo. This is session 4 in the Introduction to Interaction Design. We're going to be talking about user experience. This builds on the previous 3 sessions, and I'm going to be talking for between 2 and 3 hours with questions at the end about foundations in interaction design, particularly talking to the UE Digital Media Bachelor students who are based in Hong Kong. And also we've got people dropping in from the UK, across Europe, and in the last session we had some from North America. So welcome, thank you very much. As ever, please do post questions into the chat. Hit the subscribe button and you'll get updates on this and other videos about interaction design, creative coding, using open frameworks, and general tutorials around the use of creative technologies and design for creative technologies. I want to say thank you to people that are piling into the chat and into the live session now. So hello to Isaac and David, Nobuhiro and Daniel and Anthony, Anthony Yu and Anthony Chen, and also to Janet. Hello to everyone. Thank you very much. Please do keep posting questions here. Hi to everyone. And after this session, if you're watching this as a recording, please do put questions into the comments, or you can contact me, daniel.buzzo@ue.ac.uk. Follow me on Twitter @danb_zzzo. And if you haven't got them already, the slide sets as PDF to download with links for videos, reading, supporting material is all available online at shape.uedigitalmedia.com. And there will be the background to this introductory set of lectures, the slide sets that you can download, including today's for interaction design, and links to the playlists at YouTube for the various lectures. And also I've embedded the lectures so you can see them straight from the sheet. There are two exercises that I've linked to about simplicity and observation, which we've discussed briefly previously. Some of the recommended reading, which is the Jesse James Garrett Elements of User Experience book, which I've made reference to, about the 5-layer model of design process. We also have a link for chapter 2 and a supporting book, which is 5th edition of Interaction Design, which is the Priest and Wiley. 2 parts about understanding qualitative and quantitative user research, and the paper that I asked you to read or suggested you read from last time, which is Let's Get Physical by Eva Honecker, which talks about the role of physicality in tangible and embodied interactions. And this was a subject that we were looking at in session 3, which I'm going to make reference to today and link in to the broader question from today is, what is user experience and what is it to experience things? You can also download the module specification, which I'm going to talk about, and the learning goals and the assessments towards the end. And there's further reading and some suggested videos, some of which we've looked at briefly and some of which I've linked to, and also links for Interaction Design Association, Design Toolkit, etc. So without further ado, Curious Cat has just joined us, and Janet as well, so thank you very much. Please do say hi in the chat and I'll keep monitoring this. I have a multi-camera setup, and as ever we have builders in the building improving things and making them better, which involves drilling holes in stuff, which is very, very loud. So I'm close micing everything today, and if we get some background noise we will just persevere and keep going through it. So we're talking about interaction design and asking this principal question is, what is interaction and how do we design for it? In session 1 and session 2, we've looked at what happens below the surface, where we have systems that have very, very similar components and similar processes that are expressed in the world in very different ways. And this idea of being in the world underpins some of the discussion that we're having and some of the argument that I'm putting forward that brings us to where we are today. But the idea that we can design interactions with character that are below the surface, and the surface is only an expression of the complexity that's going on underneath, or the simplicity that's going on underneath, has been raised in some of the questions that we saw from Aral Balkan, we saw from Berg and Dentsu, we saw from Microsoft, we saw from designers at Twitter, and a number of other organizations who were talking about making meaning. And the meaning is indicated by the surface, but the meaning is underneath. Meaning is something that is essentially non-verbal. And we use our words, our drawings, our expressions to express this in different ways. Now, what I want to talk about is UX, which is badly spelled acronym for user experience, and dig into this idea, because people talk less about interaction design within industry now, and much more about UX. There are lots and lots of jobs labeled UX. And I want to dig in a little bit to what is that if it's not an extension of graphic design, which is a very strong argument that I'm trying to make, that graphic design is an industry and a skill, but interaction design is a different arena. So we talked about Seymour Papert yesterday. Seymour Papert, mathematician, educationalist, computer scientist, and we saw a video for him talking about the idea of knowing and what it is to learn, and thinking about that from essentially a user's perspective. Not just saying, here are some facts, here's a process, you learn it. Actually trying to reverse engineer what happens in that process and think, how does the person learning this learn? Because one of the important things is communication isn't what's said, it's what's heard. And you can talk and talk and talk and talk, and if the other person on the other part of the conversation isn't hearing anything, there's no communication going on. And that's an important thing. It's a sort of chicken and egg situation. But if the person on the other side of the conversation is not hearing anything, there is no communication going on. And often we need to think about this and see if we can reverse engineer a situation. As much as we would like to be seen to be doing things, it's actually at the reception end. And this underpins one of these questions of designers going, it's not my fault, the users are just using it wrong. And this approach to solutionism, to say there is one straight line single solution that as great designers we all bestow upon people, is a real challenge to get out of. Because what we're interested in is not necessarily looking great, but about making things that are effective for people. And that comes from the use of the people. As Johnny Ives said, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, when a designer designs a product, they actually design two products, the one they design and the one that people use. And this trying to look beyond yourself, trying to understand, trying to discover is very, very important. And Seymour Papert looked at this and said, well, how do people learn? And we experience the world. We experience the world physically. We experience the world emotionally. We experience the world as an experience. And he talked about learning as an experience. And a lot of it is embodied. So he was taking mathematical concepts and working with children and saying, well, how do you describe angles and degrees? We can draw them. But if you ask somebody to turn through 90 degrees, suddenly it makes sense. It's an embodied experience. And this is one of the things that we talked about yesterday. And Seymour Papert, with the designer of the Turtles, and this idea of physicality, even though it's using computer systems underneath, extended some of the ideas that we were discussing about moving away from purely screen-based things. And this is his point, is learning is rooted in experience. Bear with me just a moment, because I'm going to Learning is rooted in experience. So learning is rooted in experience. And there is this issue about learning, about trying to transfer information, that I may know how to do something, and I may want to give that knowledge that I've built to you, but I can't take it out of my head and put it in your head. And this is one of the parts of my practice that I feel is really important, which is a little bit of a frustration in working this medium, but we do the best that we can with multiple cameras and exercises and questions to you, is that if I have knowledge about a process, for instance, this is something I do know how to do. I know how to rebuild the engine for a vintage Volkswagen car. And I've learned how to do that by other people showing me and doing it myself, and built up knowledge about how to assemble it, how to measure different parts, how to clean different parts, how to check whether they're worn, about how to set up the differences and tolerances and distances inside parts of the engine. And I can't take that knowledge out of my head and give it to you and put it into your head. But what I can do is I can design a series of exercises based upon my knowledge that will help guide you through that process of building your own knowledge. And this is one of the arguments underneath quite a lot of different learning theories of how people build or generate knowledge within themselves, that it's experiential. So this is one of his arguments, and I think that's a really interesting argument that extends to almost anywhere where we think about designing. That people build knowledge about their environment, about tools, about navigation of the physical world, or about digital systems through experiencing them. And we can't directly put knowledge into their heads, but we can design experiences to help them go through, which means trying to understand and potentially anticipate what other people are doing. And the first place that we can understand it is by talking and working with those people. Well, I want to consider UX through two cases. Eva Hornecker is talking about physicality, and Seema Papat about this concentration on experience. One of the words that came up is embodiment, which is a representation or expression of something in a tangible or visible form. We talked about physicality, about bodies and objects, and living in this wider physical world and the space that we inhabit. Yesterday we saw some great examples of different ways that we can do physical computing. The idea that computing doesn't necessarily have a particular medium, but often it comes out in a screen with these fairly crude tools, a mouse, or more recently a touch screen. But we are swiping fingers around on glass, as I've heard people talk about it as. And we saw how we can use things like the simple makey, the leap motion, 3D sensors, and a lot of different approaches to do simple physical interactions that embed the computing interfaces and the information into our physical world. Because we're embedded in physical space, we think about this idea of tangible manipulation because we experience the world through our senses. We can think about this as an important principle of the design of interaction rather than interface. The builders have joined in next door, they're applauding, they're enjoying, and hopefully they'll be joining us in the chat. So also King Chan has just joined us, so hello, and please do, if you're joining and watching us now, just put a hello into the chat channel, and it'd be really nice to see you all there and feel that we're all part of the same room. Ordinarily we'd be doing this physically, and we'd be playing around with physical things and doing lots of breakout activities to really run through these ideas, and I'd be able to hear a lot more from you. So please do let me know that you're here. It's really nice to see you. Coming back to this issue, we've raised it a couple of times, and it is fundamentally important that we're designing interaction and not interface. So UI, user interface design, is an aspect of thinking about interaction design, but it is at the surface layer. If you think about it, the interface is the joining interstitial space between a system and another system. Or in our instance, generally a system and a person. It's that surface layer. What we're interested in is looking at the design of systems, the organization of information, the organization of functions, the presentation of capabilities within the system that suit what the people need to do. And we organize the system so that it works for the people that will use our system, so that it is comprehensible, it's understandable, that it solves the right problems, to come back to our Balkan. And then, when we have our system organized that suits the needs, we look at how we connect these two entities, which is then the interface. But the interface comes after the interaction design. So we should be thinking about the design of the interaction. And that comes out of understanding what the core strategy is. What is this thing that we're doing? What does it need to achieve, and who is it for, and where will they use it? So these ideas of context come back up. Fundamental. And thinking about the context of use will dictate what the interface may be. And that interface may be speech. It may be drawing. It may be gestural. It may be physical. It may be screen-based. It may be textually based. But that is dictated by the interaction design. And that's a really fundamental point to remember. We're also thinking about the interaction dynamics and qualities, and thinking about this idea of attention. Some will come to the foreground and some will not. But this character of interaction is something that we've seen. We saw the Berg-Dentsu vision, which is about layering of information, the most important information being the most immediate, and the least important information sliding into the background, almost to be ambient, that we can reach for if we want it, but it's not instantly demanding our attention, with every single piece of information being an interruption of equivalent level. The thing about our tactile sense as well, when we think about the physicality that we discussed yesterday, is that we're multimodal. We've got many different ways of sensing things. We can sense resistance and temperature and surface quality and softness and weight and balance. One of the exercises I did yesterday was with the leap motion, reaching into a virtual space with my hands and being able to pick up and manipulate virtual objects very, very, very freely. And this balance between ways of interacting is something really to bear in mind as we move forward. And we think about the spatiality, not only physically, but mentally, of what it is that we're doing. Because we're spatial beings, we live and meet each other in space. And often when we think about structures of ideas, we build conceptual spaces, three-dimensional conceptual spaces. And we build what's called a user conception model. How do I get from here to there? I walk along this corridor, there are doors at the end, there are stairs downstairs, and I move forward, and I spatially map information. People talk about building a mind palace to remember things and spatializing knowledge. And when we're building interactive systems, or the design of interactive systems, this idea of coherent internal space, of being able to clearly relate how I move from here to there, not imitating a 3D environment of saying, well, actually put a hallway and some stairs on screen and you have a virtual avatar body that moves around inside a house. But making things conceptually congruent so that it's clear that this function links to that function and there are discrete spaces, but it's consistent as an internal model of logic about how activities work. And our bodies and active bodily experiences shape how we perceive, feel, and think. There's a word called proprioceptic or proprioception, which means about the shape and size of our bodies. And if you think underneath this as an aside, the reason our bodies are the shape that they are, that we're generally the range of heights that we are and weights that we are, and our skin is the type and thickness that it is, and we have hair on our bodies, and our eyes work in the way that they do, and our ears hear in the spectrum that they do, is because of where our planet is in relationship to the sun. So our bodies are a response to gravity and our environment, and we experience the world through the shape of our bodies. And this is an important thing to remember, that we're not a separated mind from a body, and our mind is organized by our body, and we experience the world. And this idea of experiencing the world is vitally important, because we're not discrete organisms that just have a specific goal and that's all we do. Our lives and our intentions change and are complex. So the everyday environments that we're thinking about are increasingly digital and physical mixed together. And we can design new types of interaction for these new types of world that fit our innate abilities with fewer intermediaries. And we saw this in some of the different videos where we've seen communication enabled between people by systems, or interrupted, where the system puts itself in between the communication of one person and another. So effectively, we communicate to the system and the system communicates to another person as a paradigm. And we've seen the alternative to that, where the systems remove themselves into the background and enable communication on the top. And these are different styles. There is no particular engineering need for one system or another, but there's an intent in them. So we think about a lived body experience. So think about the systems that you've looked at. In the first session, I asked you to look at your environment and see interruptions in your daily life, and think about these digital interruptions and how you may design them differently. People talked about notifications. People talked about interruptions from mobile phones. People talked about interruptions from websites. People talked about some of the elements in their physical environment inside buildings where they live. And think about that as a lived sensory experience, how you move within that as a system, in that systems aren't just embodied in discrete computational devices. The new building that I'm in here has been rewired, and each floor is a network. And on each floor, it's connected to a larger network. And the building has become a system. Doors that I can open and close with an RFID smart card. Discrete electricity meters monitoring electric usage. New HVAC systems for heating and air conditioning that are connected. Cabling and networking for all of the internet, all of the fire alarms, all of the access systems, the water monitoring systems, to make the building more efficient. But it's a system that I'm interacting with and I'm working inside. I want to bring you to a book that I would heartily recommend, and is a book that I recommend for all of the master students that I work with on the Creative Technology Master, and is a fantastic book to read. You can get it through the library. You can also get it from MIT Press, and the link is here. You can find it online. And it's called Technology as Experience by Pete Wright and John McCarthy. And in this book, the first half is the important elements. The second half is a series of very interesting case studies. But in the first half, they talk about where interaction design has come from, laying out different decades of thinking. And they come to a central treaty. Their point within inside the book is to say, essentially, that when we think about designing anything that's called user experience, we've got to take into account emotional, intellectual, and sensual aspects of interactions with technology. The bottom line is to remember that we don't use technology, we experience it. If that sounds strange, a lot of the discussion around using technology or design of technology and our interactions with technology, whether it's a television or a mobile phone or a lift or an accounting package, is that we use it. But if one talked about a beautiful garden that we might go and walk in, we wouldn't talk about using the garden. We would go and experience the garden. We wouldn't walk in the countryside or go cycling and talk about using the countryside. We would go and experience it. We wouldn't go to the beach and use the beach. We'd experience it. We wouldn't go and play tennis and use tennis. We would experience playing tennis. And all of these things are akin to technology, and we experience them. We have base emotional reactions to all of the things that we do. And in a lecture, I would go through people's responses to different kinds of technologies, particularly the point where you're screaming at a website because it makes no sense, because it's inconsistent, because it's poorly designed, because it's functioning badly. And there is a frustration that we can bring to it. And there are areas where we can bring joy to interactions, where things just work. We saw Jesse James Garrett talking about this, paraphrasing Steve Jobs, saying he's looking at simple, elegant solutions that work. Simple, elegant solutions that work. And in that there is a joy. We saw Errol Balkan talking about this, about trying to define experiences that engage and delight. And this is not to say that fun is frivolous. Fun is a very, very serious matter. And enjoyable experiences, whether it's just a tool that works well, is beautifully designed, fits the purpose that we have, allows us to do things more easily or better, actually change our brain chemistry. And we saw Don Norman talking about this, how different kinds of environments change our brain chemistry that give us focus first or depth first attention, that allow us to be able to do different kinds of tasks better. There's a physiological response. So we have this neurophysiological response and emotional response to everything that we do. And the Wright and McCarthy book talks through this. I really do recommend having a read of it. But the bottom takeaway is that when you think about technology, it's part of the world in the way that we are. And just like we have emotional reactions to going and having a good meal or a bad meal, meeting friends that we like and friends that perhaps we're having challenges and problems with, we have emotional reactions to all of it. We experience it at a bodily, visceral level. When we think about translating this into design, we think about having a challenge that we want to apply our brain power and our industry to. There's a number of different design approaches that have become common and we can think about using. The first of which is the idea of user-centered design. Lots and lots and lots of people say, well, we do user-centered design. Of course we do. Everyone does. But actually, lots and lots of people that say they do user-centered design are actually doing something different. It's difficult to get away from this being the dominant paradigm. But if you dig into it, you see that along others, there are many different approaches that you can take, or combinations of them, depending upon your project and the goals of the people that you're designing for. So in user-centered design, it's a focus on usually individual users, their goals, their needs, and their individual or group context of use. And this is a lot of what we've been designing from a user-centered approach. And user-centered design really gained traction in the late 80s and 90s as a paradigm to say, well, previously we've been working in this way, coming out of cognitive ergonomics and systems design, but now we need to think about users, particularly with the growth of the personal computer. We can also take a different design approach, which is activity-centered design, where we can say, we'll move away from the individual users or the goals or their needs and actually look at the activities that are going on and try to design around the activities, and people will come to an activity. In that, if our activity is cycling or traveling on the bus, we actually focus on the activities and people will come to that activity and then leave the activity, and other people will come to the activity and leave the activity. We can also think about systems design, which looks at the needs of a system as a whole. And within that model, which in some ways is an older model, is that the systems can include people and also can be multiple devices. There is an interesting thing starting to happen, and I saw this discussion a couple of years ago, and initially I was a little skeptical because it sounded like one of those things where people take a contrary standpoint because it sounds interesting or exciting. And I had a couple of interesting conversations where some friends of mine, some colleagues of mine that are particularly smart and I like to hang out with because they teach me things, unpacked some of this thinking And then in conversations and seeing work that was going on, seeing that a new design approach that's being discussed of non-user-centered design was actually an interesting standpoint. Because one of the challenges that we have is, how do we design for the world that we currently have, which is of reducing resources, significant human-caused climate change, extinction of species, overuse of toxic materials, plastic pollution, overuse of energy, overuse of land, and a disposable culture. And how do we design with an environmental or sustainable agenda as part of our design process, which it certainly should be. And one of the challenges is, if we put the user at the center, their needs come above everything else. And the idea of non-user-centered design, and there's still discussion going on about this, so this is my take on it, is that you actually include environmental and ecological factors as a part of the design process. And you consider those in the impact of the design, to say that an individual user's needs are not paramount in the design of the system. And if an individual's user's needs are outweighed by the needs of many, that's fine. Their goals and the design for them can be reduced in importance within that. And if an individual user's needs are outweighed by the ecological or environmental or sustainability factors, then perhaps we need to change the design goals. In that, if we purely go on a user-centered design and looking at the needs of individual users, we're almost designing, potentially, in a selfish way, to say this user's needs are more important than the air pollution that they cause, than the energy use that's incurred, than the privacy impacts on other people, the societal or cultural impact. That actually taking the user down a little to consider these wider impacts makes better design as a whole. So it's an interesting discussion, and I'm really keen to see where it goes, and I'm following it through conferences and reading and designers, engineers, scientists, theoreticians talking and starting to put this into practice. The idea of non-user-centered design being central to a sustainability agenda within technology use and design for technology. So it's an interesting one, and I'm really following that. And if you've got questions or thoughts or opinions, or you're seeing interesting work, please do put it into the chat now, or post comments after, because I'd like to see where this goes. So I want to take a brief pause at this point to talk about physicality in a much more fun sense. And this is a fantastic video from the band OK Go, who have got a reputation for building incredible pop videos. Now, I'm going to probably get a copyright ban if I play this with audio, so I'm going to post the URL into the chat for you, and I'd like you to go off and just spend 3 minutes having a look at this and think about physicality. Come back here, give me a thumbs up. And this is OK Go. I'm going to see if I can run it briefly, maybe 30 seconds, with the sound off. So go and have a look. This is OK Go talking about, or building a Rube Goldberg machine. And hopefully we can run through without YouTube banning us on the live stream, and think about all of the interactions that are going on that are physical. Okay, I'm going to pause it there. I've just had a warning coming up that YouTube has detected that this is somebody else's pop video, even though I'm not running the audio. So we're going to pause it there. Please do finish watching it. And when you've watched it, give me a thumbs up. So we'll just let this run for a little bit more. And when people are coming back in, there is a comment. Curious Cat has just raised, we talk about privacy in previous session, saying that WhatsApp has just given its users an ultimatum to give their private information. Now, that is absolutely correct in some ways. My understanding is that WhatsApp was a separate company and Facebook bought them on the basis that WhatsApp had your address book. You had all your contacts, and that each of those contacts, each address book from each user of WhatsApp was worth about $30 in advertising revenue to Facebook. So when you use WhatsApp, it requires you to give them access to your whole address book. So it's able to know who you know. And that data is provided to Facebook, so Facebook knows who you know. There seems to be a new agreement that WhatsApp, or Facebook that own WhatsApp, want to force users into with no option to provide all of the metadata about who you talk to, how often you talk to them, where you talk to them, and the kind of media that you send them, so that they can continue to map all of your contacts with everyone else. So it's not just a privacy issue for an individual WhatsApp user, it's a privacy issue for every single WhatsApp user. Now this is a question you can ask yourself and decide how much information you want to provide to Facebook about what you do and what everyone that you know does. One thing that I have seen is the encrypted app Signal, which works in a very, very similar way. It's a messaging app that you can do group messaging, you can call through, you can video call through, called Signal, which is end-to-end encrypted, and it's anonymous if you want it to be, has seen a massive influx of users. So if you're a WhatsApp user and you're thinking about alternatives, have a look at Signal perhaps. Of course, if it's something that you're happy with, click agree, and then your data will be given to Facebook. So the copyright issue that I'm getting in a live stream here has gone away, so hopefully we won't get banned, but in the replay I may have to go and trim this a little bit out, as I've done previously, where there's been material that I wanted to share, interviews with designers, etc. But we'll see how we get on. The Rube Goldberg machine here is beautiful, and I put it in there partly as a bit of light relief, but partly because it says, look at how we physically experience the world. So I want to move on from this idea of talking about experience, about people, understanding users. And I raised the question of ethnography previously. And we talked yesterday about prototyping and about research. And ethnography was raised briefly there, which is, I want to go and investigate and design within this problem domain. I want to design for these group of users. I want to design to support so-and-so. I want to design for this kind of experience. Ethnography is the study of going and seeing what people do where they do it. Understanding that if we ask somebody to come into our lab or our design studio, they'll behave differently than they do at home. And the power balance between me as a designer or a scientist or an engineer or you and the user changes. The idea is that people will behave more naturally and do things more naturally without being self-conscious about it in their own environment. And if we're interested in doing research to understand a problem before we start designing, through the design process in iterative design, as we discussed, and for testing after we deliver alpha and beta products, we should go and do it in the field. So ethnography is a study through direct observation of users, and I would actually say people. Users is almost a subclass of people. These are people that will use a system in their natural environment rather than in a lab. And the objective of this type of research is to gain insights into how people interact with things in their natural environment. There is a challenge that when we ask people to self-report, when we ask people questions, they're often even in an interpersonal context, trying to work out what's an acceptable answer that we can share, that the other person will not disagree with, that will not dislike us for, because we're conscious about how we're seen and we're conscious about interpersonal relationships. And this is completely true of doing research in interaction design and user experience. So trying to get better insights, and often knowing that people self-report badly and don't necessarily have the language or the specialist insight or our understanding as designers of the things that we're trying to get information about, to be able to describe what it is that we would say in our words. They will say it in their own words. So being able to go and observe what people do, where they do it, gives us real insight. And this is ethnography. And this is fundamental to designing better products, better things that work better for people. Now, there's a video from William White Hollingsworth which talks about the beginning of ethnographic study. And the example that I want to show you a little bit of now talks about a challenge of looking at large infrastructure projects coming out of the 1950s and 1960s in the US, where decisions were being made about things like environment and building, planning, policy, based upon hoped and intended outcomes. But there were very few techniques to understand why things were being done, especially large infrastructure projects to do city rebuilding, infrastructure growth, and so on, where lots of money was provided with hoped outcomes. This will stimulate jobs, this will make more pleasant environments, this will improve communication, this will improve transportation. But measuring those, especially where there were people involved, was quite complex. And Hollingsworth and this small video looked at different techniques for going and working out how public spaces were being used. And I'm going to play just a short piece of this, and I recommend you go and watch the rest of it. There are several different edits available that you can find online. But it talks about observational research techniques. We want to go and see what people are doing. Now, coming out of high school and into early bachelor years, the go-to thing is, let's go and do a questionnaire. And unfortunately, questionnaires are often very inefficient vehicles. And they only tell us a certain kind of thing. They only tell us answers to the questions that we're making. And they're very difficult to design well. And using observational ethnographic techniques of going to where people are doing things and looking at what they do gives us a great insight that helps us hopefully get over some of our assumptions and find some evidence to support the behavior of people when they're not necessarily being interviewed. And we're not looking at their self-reporting, we're actually looking at their behavior.
This is the plaza of the Seagram building in New York. Late morning. With a time-lapse camera, we were testing a hypothesis. The sun, we were pretty sure, would be the chief factor in determining where people would sit or not sit. Now, just after 12, they begin to sit. Right where the sun is. I was enormously pleased. What a perfectly splendid correlation. It was quite misleading, as we would see later, but it was a very encouraging way to start. We were studying the Seagram Plaza because it was one of the most popular. Many people didn't think that it would be, but it was, and we wanted to find out why. Our research group, the Street Life Project, had been observing other kinds of city spaces. One was a block of 101st Street in East Harlem. We didn't know it at the time, but almost every factor that later we were to find was important for a city space, we couldn't have found out right here. The clues were right under our noses. We had studied play areas, such as this adventure playground. It was a very good one, too. Wonderfully messy, lots of dirt and mud and the water that kids love so much. Sometimes it was crowded, and this was a problem that we were very interested in because we had started out with great concern over the problem of urban overcrowding. But the more we studied this play area and other play areas, the more we began to realize that the great problem of these spaces is not overuse, but underuse. Even this playground, a very good one, on a day like now, which is a beautiful day in July, sometimes is almost completely empty except for the play director. When we looked at the center of the city, we found underuse was even more apparent. Most office building plazas were empty most of the time, even at lunch on a beautiful day. Now, it wasn't meant to be that way. The city had been giving bonuses, floor space bonuses, to builders for providing plazas. If the builders did, they could add more floors to their building. And so they did. They built the extra floors and got all that extra money, and in return, they gave these empty spaces. In other cities, whether through the bonus provision or not, builders seem to come up with the same kind of very empty spaces. But some plazas had lots of people, such as Seagram. Suppose we could find out what it was that made the good ones work and the others not. We put the matter to the Planning Commission. They said if we could nail down the answers, back them up with facts, they would draw up a new zoning resolution for open spaces. So we went to work. We set up cameras for time-lapse coverage of a cross-section of spaces, about 14 plazas and 3 small parks. But our main technique was simple, direct observation. We made up maps for each of the spaces, and then we would go around periodically and map where the people sat, what they were doing, what the time of day was, the temperature, and so on. And it doesn't take much longer to do this than to make a simple head count. But as you build up the record, a number of patterns begin to appear. The first thing that strikes you is the extraordinary diversity of activity. People reading, eating, talking, playing games. The sociability is really rather important. We found that the proportion of people in groups can tell you a number of things. The most used plazas tend to have a higher proportion of people in 2s and 3s than the less successful ones. But the most sociable plazas also have, in absolute numbers, the greatest number of individuals. A busy place, for some reason, seems to be the most congenial kind of place if you want to be alone, or talk, as this man is, to oneself. The number one activity is people looking at other people, but it is a point that is overlooked in many, many designs. Oneself. The number one activity is people looking at other people, but it is a point that is overlooked in many, many designs.
So I'm going to stop the video there. It goes on and it explores quite a large study. And initially, you look at it and go, well, this is just very old research. But thinking about what they're doing and how that applies to us, thinking about interaction design and thinking about user experience, is really fundamental in that they wanted to find out a complicated piece of information that often the answer to which is everyone knows. Everyone knows that. Or I know why. But then to stop and say, how do I know this? On what evidence, on what basis does everyone know this? Or do I definitely know because, is where we start as designers. And design research starts to become a massively important part of what we know. In that, if we can try to get away from being genius designers who just know intuitively and actually base what we're doing on evidence, we produce better things. We get away from the risks of, as we saw, solving the wrong problem. And even in this short piece of reporting, Hollingsworth says, we saw our first observations and they agreed with what we thought was going on, which we found out was actually completely wrong when we did some more observations. They had certain theories about why this area was used and this area was not used, and how to design areas that would be used. And through observation, they found some of the factors that made one area successful, or in our instance, one piece of software, one piece of technology, one system successful versus others that were unsuccessful. Also taking into account qualitative and quantitative that we saw from things like Microsoft Word. And just because lots of people use a thing doesn't necessarily mean that they like it. And just because lots of people dislike a thing doesn't mean it doesn't get used. In that, as we saw in the first session, hundreds of millions of people, possibly, huge amounts of people use tools such as Microsoft Word. And when I do this in a lecture, 95% of the people use a particular software tool. But when I ask them what their experiences are not necessarily very positive. And taking one aspect or the other would give you counterindications, but we get complexity underneath. And Hollingworth talks about this, and this is an important thing that we need to think about. How do we know the things that we're basing our design on? And should we go and do observational research like this, ethnographic research, in the field? Where are people sitting? What devices are they using? What goals are they trying to achieve? What are their activities? When are they there? How many are they there? What are they doing while they're there? How do they deal with current situations? And then being able to bring that back as the foundation for iterating through designs. So when we think about processes of ethnography, we can think about passive observation as we've seen here. We can see active observation where people are going out and using mapping to see where people are sitting, or recording what they're doing using time-lapse cameras. We can also go and do contextual interviews. Potentially, we can go and talk to people where they're working, where they're congregating, in the context of what they're doing, which gives us insights in the context of use. Now, the advantages of some of these approaches versus other things like lab studies or usability studies is that we can see firsthand how people work with technology in the field. And we could identify issues that we couldn't necessarily do in a usability test. Bring people into the lab, show them my design, see if they can achieve a particular goal. That's fine, but if we were to do that in the field, it may well be that they say, I don't want to do that. Something as simple as that, that is prompted by looking at how people work in the field. Now, it's also, from a commercial point of view, vital. We've designed this fantastic thing. Everybody comes in and says they love it, and then they don't do it. And this came up, I was talking with one of my PhD students the other day, and I gave them a design research project. And they talked about virtual experiences, and they were looking at cultural experiences, how we can no longer go to art galleries and museums and live music and poetry readings and theatre. And they wanted to see how people were reacting to a lot of these things moving online, that I can go and book a ticket to see a theatre show on camera. It all starts at 7 p.m. and there's 500 people watching it online. These cultural experiences that have moved online. And they did a lot of interviews and they did a lot of questionnaires, and they came back and they said, nearly every single person that I interviewed filled in the contradictions. And by looking at how people actually deal with technology, we find these contradictions out. So So there are some disadvantages to thinking about working in ethnographic study in a design context. It can take longer to generate and analyze findings. We're seeing all of this rich information, watching what people do, seeing how they do things. Trying to find significant findings out from it can be complex and difficult. But even if taken lightly, it allows us to get a much better insight to what's going on. Now, short studies, especially if we're asking people to do adoptive studies where we say, here, we've designed this thing, take it home and use it for a week, please, and then come back and tell me about it, may take longer. It doesn't necessarily give us quick answers. And potentially, if you're doing a large-scale study, ethnographic studies can be a little bit more expensive rather than, both in money and time terms, rather than doing a usability test of inviting 10 people into the lab in an afternoon to come and test a piece of software or a tool that you've built. Now, there is an element called auto-ethnography within this, which, for our perspective of having often very little budget and small amounts of time and working on small projects fast, can be really, really helpful. And it's the idea of auto-ethnography. Just like autobiography, it means doing it ourselves. And it's a form of qualitative research in which the author, us, uses self-reflection and writing to explore anecdotal and personal experience and connect this autobiographical story into a wider cultural, social, political meanings and understandings. Essentially, it's go to the place where people are doing it and do it yourself. And that's absolutely valid. When you report and you share and you analyze your findings, what you do need to do is differentiate. Different kinds of results and observations will have different weighting in being evidence to support what you do. If you go and observe 50 people doing a particular thing and they report a particular kind of thing, that's a real body of evidence. If you go and observe and interview 5,000 people, that's an even weightier body of evidence. If you go and do it yourself, that's one person. It can bring significant insights very fast, but you need to say, this is based upon an autoethnographic observation. And these are my impressions, versus this is a survey of 50,000 people, which has a higher ranking or a higher weighting of evidence. It doesn't mean that one discounts the other, but one can compare them in different weightings. So the idea of autoethnography, for our purposes, is really important, because we can sit in a lab, we can sit in a studio, we can sit in a design environment and imagine what things are like, based upon anecdotally what we've read or what we've seen, the stories we've been told, what we've seen on television. But going and doing a thing can bring us insights that quantitative and qualitative information may not. The example that I'll give to you, I mentioned this before, about qualitative and quantitative, is looking at a roller coaster. Now, on one hand, we have the same contradiction. People queue up and pay good money to have what is, on the face of it, an essentially unpleasant experience. Physiologically, they're stressed, their adrenaline levels are high, they have huge fear responses. So we have an experience that is physically unpleasant, that people want to do. So we have this contradiction. We can look at this quantitatively. How many people will come on this ride in a year? How much will they pay per person? How long does the ride take? What is the distance that they travel? What is the height of the roller coaster? What speed does it go to? How many G do they pull in the corners? What does their heart rate go to? These are all quantitative pieces of information, and they don't really tell us about the experience of riding a roller coaster, but they tell us a lot of other parts of the story. We could go and observe and interview people. We could see potentially their anticipation and nervous excitement queuing up. We could see them getting on. We could record their screams as they go flying around on a roller coaster. We could interview them afterwards when they're looking all pale-faced and slightly dizzy. And this all takes a period of time. But if we wanted to find out really quickly what's going on in this human contradiction of saying, I'm going to pay for an experience that physiologically is unpleasant? We could just queue up and pay our $10 or $100 Hong Kong at Ocean Park or at Disney World and get on the roller coaster and ride it ourselves. And the experience is a non-verbal experience. We physically, viscerally have this experience with this piece of technology, complex technology. And trying to disseminate that or dissemble it into words is a complex thing. But just going and doing it auto-ethnographically and then writing down our reflection, maybe taking photographs of ourselves, doing selfies in the queue beforehand, doing selfies afterwards, and then writing about how we felt before, how we felt on it, how we felt after. Even recording ourselves talking before we go when we're in the queue, going to get onto the ride. And then recording ourselves talking about how we felt after allows us, when we come back to the lab, to look at that evidence that we've made ourselves and reflect on what do we think is going on in this strange contradiction of this experience of this complicated technology of engineering and systems. There's people paying good money to scare themselves and have an unpleasant experience. And that tells us some of the complexity. And very little of this would we be able to dissemble sitting in the lab. So the idea of ethnography, going to where people do things and observing, understanding, really gives us strong foundations to do better design work from. And then autoethnography can be a part of that. So I want to take you to a piece of design work from two designers, Matthias Laschke and Mark Hassenzahl, that looks at this challenge of when we do observation and we start to understand the experience of people, how do we end up designing for that? And this is a piece of work called Key Moment, and it's come from a series of designs that were done and they're continuing to do, that's looking at essentially behavior change. How do we make or help or support people with technological systems to make different or better or more reflective decisions about things, often with a well-being or a sustainability basis underneath. And one of the things that they're able to focus on beautifully, and I'm going to show you the example in a minute, is being able to look at a situation that real people go through and look at the point when decisions are made. In that I may make promises to myself that I'm going to use my bicycle every day rather than the car, or I'm going to walk up the stairs rather than take the lift, because I know that's a good thing for me. To have more exercise, to use less power, I will be healthier, I'll be happier, I'll use less energy, be more sustainable. And in advance of a situation, I can make these decisions. I'm going to, for New Year, eat more healthily. If I drink alcohol, I'm going to drink less alcohol, or I'm going to not drink for the whole of the month, or I'm going to get into an exercise regime and do yoga or go to the gym, or I'm going to go to bed earlier, or I'm going to take better care of my friends, or these things that we decide in advance. But the decision point for doing or not doing comes at a specific moment. And this particular moment is embodied in this beautiful piece of design, which I really, really like, which is called Key Moment. And it's looking at that key moment when a decision is made. And rather than having a system that is coercive, many systems that are supposed to support behavior change gamify things. So they take a pleasurable, enjoyable activity and turn it into a job. I like cycling, I like walking, I like swimming, but now I've got a spreadsheet to fill in, and that activity, a la Strava and Fitbit, has become a job that I'm supposed to do. And the idea of gamification, of infantilizing it, of giving me points for doing things that I wanted to do anyway, as if I'm trying to please another person, is a challenging one as a paradigm for behavior change or self-improvement. One of the challenges is making the system subservient to the user. Because one of the issues, and we'll see in Key Moment, is that there's a theory from Brehm called reactance. When we feel that our agency has been taken away, somebody's making decisions for us, taking our ability to make decisions away, people react psychologically in a negative way. For me, it's the feeling of being 12 years old again and stamping my foot and wanting to go, well, no, damn you, I'm not going to do it. Because people are taking our agency away. Arl Balkan talked about this in a very first example that we saw of the two ticket machines. One ticket machine understands necessarily what you want to do and supports you in being able to do that. And he says it gives me a feeling of being a superhero. I'm a superhero because I can just swipe my card through a ticket machine, walk straight on the train unhindered, and I feel enabled. And the other ticket machine is so complex and so badly organized that we feel infantilized. We feel powerless in the face of it, and we have very strong negative reactions towards it. And when people take away our agency, that's a very common psychological reaction, this idea of reactance. And the Lashka and Hassanzal work looks at that in a really interesting way. And I've heard them talk a couple of times about it. And they talk about the idea of an aesthetic of friction. At this pivotal moment, the system will nudge and say, hey, didn't you say that you weren't going to eat that? Rather than saying, you're not allowed to eat that, which is a command, to which a lot of people unfortunately have the reaction of going, well, screw that, I'm going to do what I want. You're a machine, you can't tell me what to do. But rather than that, saying, hey, I'm just gently reminding you of what you told me to remind you about. And they call it an aesthetic of friction. This sort of rubbing at a point where there's a decision to be made, honoring the user, but questioning them about it. So I want to show you the video now for Key Moment. And if you're thinking about writing up and documenting work that you're doing and making playful prototypes, and bear in mind, this is an exploratory prototype, not to say this is necessarily a functional product that you could go and buy and has all the kinks worked out, but it's really a design to make other designers think, to say, how can we think about these kinds of processes and goals for design and approach them in a different way that doesn't just turn it into a job or a spreadsheet or gamifies it? How can we honor the user and design aesthetics around how this interaction works? So this is not designed as a product, it's an experimental prototype. The paper that's associated with it you can download is a beautiful one to read. It's nicely written. It's a great paradigm for how you report potentially on your own projects that you're going to be working on now. And this short video is becoming increasingly common for designers, particularly in the research field, to be able to share their work, where they'll document in writing and pictures, but also potentially produce short videos that explain. So I want to show that now. If I can bring this up from Vimeo, and I'll post the Vimeo link into the chat channel, because the soundtrack that they use, my understanding is they have complete clearance to use it, but YouTube doesn't. So I'd like you to go and watch this now. The link that I posted into the chat channel, Key Moment, Change Through Friendly Friction. This is from Matthias Lashko when he was studying with Mark Hassanzal. It's now teaching with Mark Hassanzal at the University of Siegen in Germany, producing some really, really interesting work and a really interesting body of thought about how we work with people and look at decision moments to support and enable them, particularly around well-being and sustainability. So I'm going to run this now. Please do watch it yourself, and you'll see some of it. I'm going to turn the sound down here, and give me a thumbs up when you come back into the channel. So that is key moment from Lashka and Hasselsal. And there are several other fantastic projects that are thought-provoking, that are beautifully executed. And this is a prototype of an idea, not for a trademarkable product that we're proposing to sell, though potentially you could take this through a number of iterations and take it to market. And I think there'd be an interesting market. But from a design perspective, where we're considering this issue of how do we design things better, that work better for people, this is an interesting proposition. And I put this alongside the background of what we've already seen, which is trying to understand the right problem and solve the right problem, not solve the wrong problem. To look at the context of use, to think about the goals and needs of users, the people that will use the system, and to consider the interaction in the world in a physical, visceral way, that we experience the world, and that people are complex with emotional responses to technology, that we experience technology, not just use it. And out of that comes this particular project, and there are many others like it from many other designers investigating this area, but I think this is a beautifully documented one, that we've looked at the challenge. We've looked at the real world situation, and we've looked at the context of use and identified this specific context where a decision is made. I'm leaving the house and I take public transport, or I take the car, or I take a bicycle, and I'm presented with this choice. And it's that identification that, as much as we might say, oh, we'll just make an app that afterwards you track what you've done, at the end of the week you get a point score, or we turned some other job on for you to do around this, that it becomes a self-policing activity. And this playfully nudges. It playfully reminds, and there is another project called Remind that actually looks at this challenge to procrastination and says, here you go, you wanted to make this decision. This is the point to make the decision. What is it that you want to do? And interestingly, they say it explicitly in the video. You can cheat the system. So the system is not dominant. It's not as if it's going to lock up the key and not let you have it. You can actually swap them, but you know that you're cheating the system. And the idea is that the system is subservient to the person using it. And it's not taking away anybody's agency, and it's not being coercive. It's not being commanding. And you don't have this challenge of reactance, of the negative reaction when people take away your agency. So it's a really interesting one. And I do recommend you go and read the paper. There's a link for it, and the video, and several other pieces of work. I'm getting a response that the audio is very low. Okay, hopefully that's better. If you can give me a thumbs up if the audio is improved and louder, and that should be working fine now. So I want to go on, and I want to look at one of these guys, Professor Mark Hassensal, who's at the University of Siegen. I believe he's the dean there now, who runs the Experience Design School. And I've been fortunate enough to do some writing and do lectures and do some work with them and their students and the master students from University West of England. King Chan is saying the audio is now better, so I'm very happy about that. We've been able to work with the students at University Siegen. Excellent. Daniel and Nobuhiro and Janet and Aya is saying yes. Actually, I was saying yeet, which is kind of cute. We've been able to work with them and bring a range of different experiences and approaches, and they are very, very steeped in research, going and observing what it is that people do, how they go about doing it, and what are the important things underneath, but also being very, very keen on practical exploration of making prototypes as tools of design research to investigate situations and the usage, and really focusing on experience. But Mark Hussenthal, there's a short video I want to play you in just a moment, starts to unpick what this discussion of experience is. And he brings up a specific point that I want to show you and then take apart and discuss, that really reinforces another aspect of this looking below the surface. That interaction design really is a process of looking below the surface and making sure that we understand the difference between user interface and interaction design. So this is part of the introduction to user experience and experience design from Mark Hussenthal from Interaction Design Foundation. And I'm going to paste the YouTube link here, and then I'm going to run it out. We start about 35 seconds in, and I just want to run through the first 4 or 5 minutes till it gets to a particular point. You can watch more of the video, but I'm going to post the link into the chat channel in case YouTube is not happy. So I'd like you to go and watch the first 5 minutes. You can start 35 seconds in for this video from Mark Hussenthal. And I'll play it through here, and if there's a challenge, I'll drop the audio and we see where we get to. But there's a particular point that he starts to make about what user experience is and the design of experience for users.
As well as experience, it's all related so close, but can you tell us what you think it is?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to take all these different things apart. But let me start with the term user experience, a term I kind of dislike a bit, because of that focus on usage only and the user, and it's like as if it would be so closely rooted only in action. But experience is a much broader field, I would say. So I would rather like to talk about experiences, or experiencing later on, and experience design as the way to create that experiences. For me, user experience is just a field of study. So there happen to be some people in the context of interactive products coming out of the usability community that thought maybe we should change our models a bit, and they came up with this word. And I think it's called user because usability was always very deeply rooted in usage. And when people invented that term, it hadn't been the consumer, but naturally the user. And experience is just, just a more focus on the user, on his or her psychology, on emotions and stuff like that. So just stressing that we should even more focus on the user. But over the time, somehow people started to take that experience term literally and try to explore, what would it mean if we really would design for experiences, not just take that as a term for denoting more closeness to people. And I think that started like 6 or 7 years ago. People started to think about what it actually is, and publications popped up. And
so designing with this in mind, what could you give examples of any products?
Basically, I think there are not that much products out there at the moment. I would like to distinguish 2 different kinds of ways of looking at the experience. One is, you have something like a moment-by-moment experience. So in that moment, you feel somehow, you do something, you think, and that all that together is like this experience you have in the moment. And this focus very much on what we do and what we think in a particular moment, and focuses also very much on the how. So if you use a product, on how does it feel, how is it how to touch, how is it, does it look like, how is it in your hands, how does it fit and stuff like that. This is one way of looking at experience, and I think a product like the iPhone or the iPod Touch with this new way of interacting with a multi-touch and physics model beneath, that's more catering to this kind of experience. I would prefer calling it the aesthetics of interaction. So for me, it's not really the thing I'm after.
What are you after?
Yeah, I'm more after like I think this window of consciousness, the moment by moment experience you have is just 3 seconds or whatever. It's very very small, and the most of our times we are working on memories of experiences we have, and they are quite different. Because the moment you experience something, you have it in you encode it somehow in your memory, and you're trying to make sense of it, to create meaning. You forget things. What you do is you construct a story of usage, and it has a beginning and end. It has a structure, and this is what you actually remember. This is what you will communicate to other people. This is the reality you had with the product, and this is nothing new. I mean, that's actually how we as humans define ourselves. We even have our own memory system for that, episodic memory, that stores these stories of our lives. And as long as we interact with certain kind of technology, we create that stories as well. This is my idea of experience. So if you put it more academically, then it's the difference between experiencing, I would say, and an experience as a story, as a narrative. And I would like to design for these stories. So that would either, on one hand, that would mean that we have to understand what these stories contain, what is in it, what is important in that stories. Are they all very personal? So will we ever have the same story, or can we talk about it? Will you understand my stories and vice versa? And how can we use that stories to put them into products? And the design part would then be retelling a story or telling a story through a product.
Can you give an example? Because it's kind of intangible.
Yeah, I understand. For me, I mean, there are not that many products around, but the Wake Up Light by Philips is a very good example. For those who don't know it, I have one here. So it looks like this. And what it does is you set a certain wake-up time, and half an hour before that, it starts lighting up, and it gets brighter and brighter. And the moment you wanted to get up, it plays back the sound of birds and or some bells or so whatever you like. And you can see the story through that object. You can see how they went to people, asked them, what is your favorite way of waking up? And they said, I hate my alarm clock, but sometimes, if I don't have to get up and the sun rises and I'm just woken by the light and I hear the birds, and that's a very nice situation. Yeah. So now the problem is that life doesn't work like that. So we can't have that experience all the time. But the product tries to give it to us, even in situations, even like a surrogate experience, even in situations where we can't have it. And now you can say, that's questionable because it's just fake. But that's not, I don't believe in that. I think it can work like love novels work. They're surrogate experiences. It's not the real thing, but it's still more meaningful to us than a ringing alarm clock. This is a very technical solution. This would be a more
in between
experiential solution, I would say. And then the interesting thing is, if you look at that design-wise, I'm an industrial designer. I think it's nothing very special. It's even not even very beautiful, I would say. And the interaction is a bit awkward and so on. And this definitely matters. And it should be better. But the basic thing about it is this experience it creates. Yeah. And in that sense, it doesn't matter much to the user whether this is ugly or not. It's more like a stand-in or a placeholder for a certain experience you can have. And this is, I think, quite different from, for example, something like the iPhone. Yeah. Because
could you describe the difference briefly?
Yeah, the iPhone is for me, it's just an infrastructure. It's a nice mobile phone. The interesting part, the experiential part, is what the applications people load on it, because that will create new opportunities. But what they actually did is they took that gadget and they designed a very nice aesthetics of interaction, and it feels good. But it's an experience created by the product, you know? Only valid for the product. So in that sense,
Yeah.
and I think it's quite a difference, because it puts the product in the fore. It makes it something. It's only, you know, make it. It's novel and special, and I can show it around. A very materialistic thing in that sense. It also feels better maybe than some buttons or something. But it's all, you know. The iPhone says, you know, I'm so cool, I'm so different. You can have. It just feels better working with me, and I would be more in products where you just, you know, forget the whole product and then care about the experience.
So this
that
is more
created.
Post-materialistic.
Exactly,
You still have a product, but the product is not in the focus.
It's like, I like that expression. It transcends its encasing.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think.
I'm going to pause Mark Hossenzahl there, and he's unpicking a couple of things behind his approaches, and many other designers discussing this, about what it is to design complex products. I want to switch to the drawing camera and talk through a couple of things, because there are two parallels at this point that I'd like to make. If I can switch to my drawing camera. Now, we saw Jesse James Garrett, and I made a discussion briefly about this, talking about a triangle of technology as a base. We saw the example of a typewriter, that when we have a mechanical typewriter and we can move to a computer that allows us to edit before we print, that's a technological advantage. And actually, if it's difficult to use, that's not a problem. It now does something for us that's not been available before. Garrett went on to talk about features. And he said that after the technology becomes available and starts to become more commonplace, in that there are other word processors available that allow us to edit, people start adding features. This one will save multiple versions. This one will allow you to add different colors. This one will allow you to add comments. And we saw that in the proliferation of features in the example he showed of Microsoft Word, having thousands of features that you could unpack in new toolbars and new toolbars and new toolbars. And he said, we've now gone beyond that, and we're at this point of experiences, and actually saying, well, the technology is commonplace to be able to have microprocessors and to be able to manipulate text on them before printing. And features are commonplace to be able to save a document, open multiple documents, have different styles, different typefaces, and different colors, to be able to put comments on it. But now actually we're designing in this new space around experiences. We realize that people, from an interaction design point of view, experience the world. We experience technology, as Wright and McCarthy say. And this is where design is. And Arl Balkan brings this up. And he says, good experiences are the design point. And if you're providing experiences that are negative for your customers, you will lose your customers. And I want to bring up, with a fresh piece of paper, something that I'm trying to get to underneath to ask you to consider. If this is the surface of a product, we have here the interface, and we have here the people that will use or interact with our system. But we're interested in designing underneath the cognitive structures, the functions, and the content, how it's organized, and the goals, and what this product does. This is where interaction design happens, below the surface, and it dictates what the interface will look like. And I think one of the things that Hassan Sal is talking about here is saying, actually, below this, there's another level, which is the experience. What is the experience of using this product like? Does it look at what my experience is? And he makes this very interesting differentiation between the way in which this operates, this dragging and dropping and sliding and bouncing, the curve of the buttons, the roundness of the screens, the typography and the color, which he says is the aesthetics of the interaction, and actually what the experience is underneath, that it's positive or negative, that it's playful. And he uses this example of saying, with our wake-up light, at a certain point, the light will give us a pleasant waking up experience. As opposed to an alarm clock, which will give us an unpleasant waking up experience. And the buttons, the icons, the physical form is less important than the experience underneath. In that this is an industrial experience. We need to wake you up, we'll just make a really, really loud noise. It doesn't matter that it's unpleasant. But the experience is unpleasant. And that here we have something that's doing the same thing, but the experience potentially is pleasant. To wake up in sunlight with the sound of birds naturally, and also potentially physiologically to our well-being, there is a benefit, a noticeable benefit that has a cost analysis to it versus this negative experience. So this is, I think, one of the things that's really worth talking about and thinking about. That first of foremost, we start with our people that will use our system. And we think about what it is they're going to interact with that is beneath the surface. And Hassan Sal makes this argument that experience design UX is not this. It's not designing the buttons. It's not designing the look and feel. It's actually designing the broader experience underneath. So this is a thing that I'd like you to bear in mind and see as an argument. Where do you feel this works? Now, this is idealized. And like many other things that we've discussed, the different systems, the 5-layer model approach from Garrett of design, it expands and contracts to suit the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. But it is something that can be thought about underneath, because often people belie experience and belie actually organizing the interaction and go straight to thinking about the interface, often without thinking about people. So we have this challenge of how do we make better experiences that are supportive of people, of the goals that they have, that actually become pleasant, bearing in mind what Norman was saying about how the experience changes our brain chemistry and our ability to solve problems. So moving on, we've covered a whole range of ideas and discussion. Now, this issue of experience and potentially fun is something that comes up in a fantastic book called Phonology, which talks about ludic design. And ludic is a fancy way of saying playful or fun. So if you want to design something that's fun, don't say that it's going to be fun, because that's seen as frivolous, and serious things should be actually unpleasant. But if they're enjoyable, people do them better. If they're enjoyable, people engage with them better. And also, if they're enjoyable, people forgive problems and weaknesses. So Bill Gaver, Mark Blythe and Mark Hussenzahl were involved with many other designers writing in phonology. They say traditionally HCI, human-computer interaction, has been concerned with work and task-based applications. But as digital technologies proliferate in the home, fun becomes an important issue. They do say that life is too important to be taken seriously, but this idea, fun has become an important issue. And there's an established body of knowledge and a range of techniques and methods for making products and interfaces usable, but far less is known about how to make them enjoyable. And this is a really interesting question, in that if we can design a device, a system, a product, and we can design a device or system or product that's fun to use or is enjoyable, which one is preferable? Which one will work better? Which one will allow people to achieve their goals at higher levels of quality or more efficiently, or just actually have a positive benefit on their life? So we can think about these things, reflecting on this idea of people interacting with systems through the interface with underpinning it an experience. And we can come to this idea of experience. And often this can be tied up with, if we're thinking in a corporate sense, of brand values. What is this intangibly that I'm going to be interacting with? And what is my relationship between the service provider or the system and the people that are using it? And put these things together. And at the very least, we need to think below the surface at this idea of interacting, and be aware that we experience, and perhaps we can think deeper and say, what kind of experience are we interested in designing? So we can think about this as designing positive experiences for well-being also. So this question comes to, if we design with users' experiences in mind, how do we design these experiences? So I want to finish up there on that point. We started with interaction design, and we've come through lots of different modes. My bottom line is, if you're thinking about interaction design, think below the surface and think about the people you're designing for, because they experience technology. They don't just use it. I'm going to take a short breather now. We've been going for an hour and 45 minutes, a little bit longer than I wanted. And then after, I want to talk through the specification for the module, and I want to talk briefly about the assignment and outline, further reading. So we're going to take a break for 5 minutes now. Please, if you're following this live, in this second part, we're going to be a little bit shorter, and I would like to take some questions from the chat, and I would like to talk a little bit about the specification and the assignment. So if you're not directly involved in this module, this may be interesting, it may be not so much. Thank you very much to everyone that's coming back in the chat. Daniel and Iowa and Curious Cat and Janet and Nobuhiro and Anthony and Thomas and Anthony and Sei Wing Yu, King Chan, Victor as well, thank you very much. Thanks very much to everyone that's in the stream. We've had a really great number of people in the stream consistently all the way through. So thank you. I hope the material's been interesting. Please do go out and refer to the slide sets, which have the links in if you need them. And I would be really grateful if you post any questions that you may have into the chat, and I'm very, very happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Or if you're watching this after, put comments into the stream, and this is available online, youtube.com/danbuzzo. It'll be embedded into the shape.uedigitalmedia.com website as well, that you can go through and see each of these. And then session 4 here, which we're on at the moment, will be available online, and I'll edit out the pieces a few hours after the stream has finished. So also thank you to Alice and Jan. Please do post questions, and I would like to have a walk through the specification for the module. So the idea behind this module is that we're going to take, reading this out, the specification is there linked if you'd like to, but I want to disassemble a little bit of so what. So you've been fantastic watching through several hours of me talking. My preference is to do this in a workshop environment face-to-face, but for a variety of reasons we're doing it on video and trying to make the best of what we've got. But we're interested in taking a human-centered perspective to interaction design and focusing on building digital products, applications, and services. And we want to look at this not just in imitating projects and products that we can currently see. Well, that's a part of what we do because this has a vocational aspect to it. What we're interested in is to say, how can we look at the existing paradigms and the gestalts, these ways of doing things, and improve them? And knowing that, like the lessons that we saw from some of the videos, that just by making products, that putting designs into the world changes the world and the problems change, how can we keep checking that the things that we've made still work, or the problems that we thought we saw or we thought people had still exist and they haven't changed? So we explore this dialogue between people and technology within different contexts, again this word context, with a view to finding creative and engaging ways to realize interactive experiences. And again, referring to this idea that we have people that through an interface will interact with an interactive structure that we've designed of content and functions. But underneath, there's an experience that we can design, because no matter what we do down here, people will experience this, because that's what we do with technology. So we have this question within the specification of what we're doing, which is you're going to explore the dialogue between people and technology in different contexts, with a view to finding creative and engaging ways to realize interactive experiences. And we're influenced by industrial design, ergonomics, human-computer interaction, and social and cognitive psychology. We've seen people over the last 4 sessions from all of these arenas talking about how their input influences interaction design, because we have this complexity of technology and people in the world. So after doing this course, seeing these lectures, working in workshops together, doing the assignment yourself, you will, the plan is, build knowledge about all of these things. And we talked about Seymour Papert and these constructivist ideas of knowledge, in that I can't take knowledge out of my head and put it into your head, but I can organize experiences that I can take you through, guide you through, along with other staff and your colleagues and your co-students, that will allow you to build your own knowledge and your own understanding and experiences. So on successful completion of this module, students will be able to, this is you and also me to a certain extent, understand forms of human communication, considering cultural and gender issues as a means of analyzing and formulating intuitive and meaningful interactions with technologies. So you understand about humans, and you can understand about interaction with technology. and compare and contrast different devices. So you're going to explore a bunch of different kinds of interactions. And we saw screen-based, we've seen web-based, we saw 3D-based, gesture-based, physical computing, and a range of other ones. And you're going to think about how you represent information. And we saw this in the Garrett 5-layer model of thinking of what is the strategy? Who is this for? What does it need to do? What is the scope? Where will it be used and how? On what devices? And then thinking about the content and the functions. What information needs to be in there? What functions need to be in there? And then how will we organize them? So you'll explore this process for yourself. You'll do research on a specific group of people, thinking about what their needs are, what their context is, what their current experience is. And then you're going to use technologies in a creative way to ideate this idea that you can generate many different design solutions that may be equally effective. So you ideate, you go through a number of different ideas, not just fixate upon the first one that you come up with. You actually let that go. Based upon evidence that you do from research of your user group, you'll come up with a number of different ideas to try out, to prototype, to evaluate, to iterate upon. And then you'll synthesize your research findings from reading, observation, competitor analysis, primary and secondary research of a qualitative and quantitative. This is the amounts and the numbers and the experiences as part of a research study. You'll also look at your own design and others and form critiques. And part of the syllabus elements, and these differ slightly each year, and these will change slightly depending upon the workshop, and every year we're trying to update what we do. You'll look at human communication, verbal, non-verbal, and the role of emotion in that. We'll look at cultural and gender issues. We'll look at exploring the scope of interaction and interaction devices in different contexts, including multi-touch, eye tracking, data gloves, tangible user interfaces, sensors, etc. We'll also potentially look at the idea of speech interfaces and also different kinds of displays. And we saw already the idea of ambient displays and multiple media surfaces. This was the work from Berg and Dentsu. Jack Schultz talking about it. The idea of layering of information, removing interruption, and having layering of availability of information to people. We've also talked about haptic and auditory interfaces and verbal and non-verbal communication. You'll look at information visualization, talk about general principles and context-specific guidelines, talk about data types and information visualization processes. We've talked about some of the idea of multi-user interaction design, where we're designing interfaces or interactive experiences that work for single user, such as the Incredibox musical toy, which I control through a mouse or a keyboard and is a system to single person experience. And something like 21 Swings, the interactive physical swings at the bus stops in Montreal that really invite groups of people to experience the system at the same time and to interact with each other and the system as a whole. So multi-user interaction, one to system and many to system and system to many. And these different approaches and different possibilities and challenges of designing for them. We'll also have a look and think about persuasive and affective design. This affective, it's going to affect people. We saw Hassan Zal and the work from Lashka and Hassan Zal looking at this, of persuasive design, of behavioral change, of troublemakers that make you think about well-being. And we're going to talk a little bit about behavioral change, well-being, social persuasion, and also different models of it. A big part of this is encouraging you to be creative and think about innovation in design. In ideation, communication of concepts and development. And underpinning it all is this idea of research-based interaction design. We're not just taking existing paradigms and deploying them again without thinking about whether they're relevant. So we're going to get away from putting the hamburger menu on everything, whether it's a mobile device or not, and actually start with thinking about what is it we know, who is this for, and let's go and check. Let's go and do some field work. Let's go and do some observation and come back and design on the basis of information that we've actually gathered. So this will be a part of your project as well. There'll be around 72 hours of contact, workshops, tutorials, keynote lectures, support, feedback. You will assimilate and develop your knowledge through another 72 hours, and you'll prepare for Element A. Element A is the written component, the exam, what we call controlled conditions element. Depending upon how this may alter with the COVID situation, there'll be around 38 or 40 hours of development for that. And you're expected to put at least 100 hours. Move this slightly. At least 120 hours into the development of your coursework, and you'll go through different parts of research, development, iteration, testing. So there's going to be a range of workshops. These are scheduled for you. You're going to go through primarily building small mini projects where you're comparing interactive devices, looking at the control of a specific technology in the home, and you're going to do a range of independent reading and learning, and that's going to be assessed in two ways: Part A and Part B. Part A, as I referred to just now, is what's called controlled conditions, the equivalent of an exam, and that's going to be 30% of the marks. Part B is the coursework. That's 70% of the marks for the module. So the two of them to go together in a 30-70 weighting will give you your overall mark for this module. Currently, and this may alter because of the COVID situation, the component A, the control conditions, is going to be a presentation and viva, so a demonstration of your mini project in one go. So that single assessment as part of control conditions will carry all of the 30%. In component B, the coursework, there's two elements to it. Mini project 1, which are going to be a critical reflection and a written report, and mini project 2, which is going to be a report with critical reflection as well. 3,000 and 2,000 words is currently the guideline. See the detail of this year's assignment. The weighting between these two, if it continues as is going to be 60-40 between project 1 and project 2, and together that's all of the coursework marks. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're studying the module, please do post me questions into the chat now. Make sure that you've downloaded the assignment. If you have queries about the assignment, please do contact me, contact Ricky, contact the staff in Hong Kong that you're working with. If you have thoughts about projects, you have questions about the design material that we've covered, please do post them into the comments now, or post them into the comments on YouTube after. You can also contact me. I'd be very happy to discuss with you, and I'll be continuing to post material online about interaction design, about creative applications of technology. So please do, as I said before, hit the subscribe. It's been fantastic to see so many of you subscribing, and lots of people coming back and commenting on other videos and asking about exploring different subjects or giving me feedback on what they're doing. And that's always really, really nice to see and understand what other people are doing. So I'm going to go to the chat for a moment. Curious Cat is saying thank you. Lots of people giving us thumbs up. Please do post in questions now, and I'm very happy to deal with them. Alternatively, you can email me, you can message me on Twitter, or you can post into the comments section. I was asking about this document. This is an older version of the specification, but the specification has just been updated with a new reading list, so the overall structure and the learning outcomes are the same. Broadly, we want to look at a whole range of different questions within interaction design and dig into some of these issues, covering from psychology through to communication, through to research and observation, with prototyping and reflection and evaluation inside it. So any more questions coming up in the chat, please do post them now, and I'm very happy to go through them while we're talking together. Now, just to remind you again, shape.uedigitalmedia.com has all of the information. If there is I was saying thank you very much. I will ensure that the specification that's linked from this website is the latest version. I'll go download that. You can also download that from your Moodle or Blackboard, VLE, the virtual learning environment. The builders are joining in and giving us a huge round of applause to say thank you very much to all of the excellent questions that are coming in the chat, so they're very happy. If there are any additional issues or questions, let me know. And as we go through this project, I'm going to be dipping in and seeing the designs that are made, and I'm going to be part of the external assessment team that's going to look at your designs after they've been marked first by the Hong Kong staff. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the work that you make. And in previous years, I've been able to attend the degree show at Lee Wai Lee using the HKDI, the Hong Kong Design Institute buildings. And it's always a fantastic show with some incredible work on show. I'm really disappointed that I can't be with you in Hong Kong right now. I'm thinking about you, seeing some of the challenges that Hong Kong is currently going through, and my heart goes out to you. It's a city that I absolutely love, and it is my other home, and I always enjoy spending time with friends and staff and students there and seeing what a vibrant culture it is, and such a creative urge and design community within Hong Kong. So I wish you the very, very best. Your staff that are local in Hong Kong are a fantastic team, and they're going to support you through the rest of this module. If you do have any questions, please do, as I say, let me know. Send me information about what you're doing. I'd love to see. I love the approach and attitude from the students in Hong Kong, and I'd love to share what the students in Bristol at UE are doing with you, and vice versa. So hopefully we'll be able to do that again. In previous years, we've brought students from the UK to visit you in Hong Kong, and we've had students from Hong Kong come and visit us in the UK, and hopefully we'll be able to do that again when we're able to travel more safely. But between now and then, if you don't have questions, I think we'll start to wrap up. I want to leave you with very, very best wishes. Say thank you to every single person that's come into the live stream. We still have lots and lots and lots of people in the live stream. This all will be available online, and I look forward to seeing the projects that you design. And no matter what you do, I hope you enjoy it, and I wish you the very best. So I will leave the chat going. I'm going to cut the camera for a moment. So if you have questions coming in, please do post them into the chat. I'm going to hang here for the next 5 or 10 minutes and deal with any questions as text, and then we can move this into the comments section on the video, or we can start to do it online via email or whatever other medium is going to work. So the builders are joining in with a symphony for us to say thank you very much. I would like to say thank you very much to the builders for their attention. Thank you very much to everyone in Hong Kong, and also the other visitors that have come into the stream. And just on time, I'm going to hang in the chat for a little bit, so please post comments, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Thank you very much for spending so much time with me. I really look forward to seeing what you design, and no matter what you do, think about users, make it fun, and try and make better products for everyone, so hopefully we can have a bit of a better world next time. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much. So actually, I'm going to pop back on camera. I just want to say thank you very much to everyone, to Curious Cat, to Iowa, to Jan, to Alice, Nobuhiro, Janet, Victor, Anthony and Anthony. So many people that have been posting. Thomas, King Chan, Daniel, Nobuhiro, Victor. I'm probably going to say a couple of people twice. Scrolling back through. Norris, hello, thank you very much. Rickin, thank you very much. King Chan, Bench. I know, Bench, you follow me on YouTube. Thank you very much. I was really interested to see. I'm following everyone back as well because I'd love to see the material that you're posting. Isaac, David, everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your kind comments. I look forward to seeing you very soon, and hopefully I'll get to see you in Hong Kong or in Bristol. Let me know what you're doing. Follow me on YouTube. I'll follow you back, and if you're posting videos there, I'd love to see, especially if you're putting videos of the projects that you're building and designing. So thank you again, everyone. I'll speak to you very soon.